The hardest thing about determining if Transit's map design is good or bad comes down to the uniqueness of the map. Essentially, Transit is 5 maps in one with 2.5 extra side areas for funsies. To determine whether or not Transit has good or bad map design, we'd have to look at the following areas individually to determine if the average overall is positive: bus depot, diner, farm, power station, town, cornfield pylon, cornfield knot, hunter's cabin, the tunnel, and the road. The bus depot is extremely small, but there's a lot of good packed within it. Detail wise, there's a lot of little things that keep the overall area fairly interesting. There's a map outlining the bus route and a potential second bus route that we all obsessed over for far too long. There's the buildable table for the most important buildable on the map, and its location is perfect for any new players to pick up the thing and, not knowing what it does, place it down immediately, only to find that the unopenable door is now powered by this device. The different parts for the turbine feel naturally placed as well, and while the initial spawn area would be considered a dead zone by itself, when considering the entire area as a whole, that dead zone becomes part of the training loop. Also, the general progression of the level from this point is severely underrated. From starting the level, the party sees a bus pull in or hears it, and is blocked by a doorway you cannot immediately buy, but also sees a second door that would need additional power. It's easy to see at least 2 parts for the turbine, and context indicates the third would be there, which then means that you build the turbine as the next part of the level. Then, you experiment with the turbine and open the door, seeing what it's used for. This allows you to find a part for the bus and to move outside, which introduces you to the bus itself, to potentially you can modify the bus, and possibly, if you're keeping your eyes open, a part for the nav card table. Curious, you would naturally, after picking up these parts, get on the bus, and the level progresses to the diner. Having the 115 meteorite piece be a literal meteor inside the bus wall is a nice touch, adding to the natural feeling of part locations for a large portion of extensive buildables. The outside area, with or without the bus, is just wide enough to be used as one big training spot, tight enough to be considered hard but not impossible to train, and therefore making it a dead zone. It's also important to note that having the turbine be the first buildable that you get instead of, say, the shield, the turret, or, God forbid, the electric trap, you can be introduced to what the turbine can do immediately, along with telling the player that, hey, there are other areas of this map that you can open up using this turbine in lieu of a main power source. Overall, a very strong start. The diner, the second stop, is where the design layout falls short. Map flow-wise, it's interesting as the map has a progression system. After the bus depot, there's a brief moment in the tunnel where you see a potential exploring opportunity, discussed later, and then you arrive at the diner. Once you're in the area, you see the glowing light piercing through the garage next to the diner, and new players will naturally go towards it to investigate and find the mystery box. Of course, experienced players will know of the mystery box and its importance. Having the mystery box here instead of a random spawn or in the biggest area town from a map progression standpoint shows that each area is an advancement of the previous area. Each new place on a natural exploration in the map, or using the bus the first loop, gives more of the map to the players, introducing each element of the map in separate areas before the party would loop back to the start. However, despite a good progression design and actual layout, the diner falls short. Between the diner and the garage, almost all of the interior space of this area is a dead zone. The diner is wide enough for a player to pass by a zombie, but any more than 1 or 2 in the area and the player will become trapped. As there are spawns that funnel in zombies from the outside, trying to stay in here when more than 1 or 2 zombies are remaining is incredibly unsafe, therefore making the diner a dead zone. The diner roof, in theory, would be a great camping spot overlooking the garage, but zombies can jump by the ledge furthest from the climb-up spot and have an additional spawn on the other side, making it a dangerous place to train or camp. Not impossible, but not preferred. However, it's not completely hopeless. The opposite side of the roof, in fact, has 0 spawns behind it, so there is surprisingly a camping spot on the roof of the diner, and not a bad one either, just closer to the climb-up than one would think. There's enough spacing for, in the event of overwhelming odds, an attempt at kiting around or trying to escape to reload. The garage itself, unfortunately, is simply too small to do anything but run inside it briefly between rounds. And the car maintenance area has a hole that zombies can crawl through, making it unsafe to camp in. Despite there being a wide open space in the center of the area, the spawns are all over the place, making it awkward to train in, especially on later rounds where they can literally come up out of the ground right in the middle of your train. There's also a small, pointless side area covered in fog that does nothing but have denizens inside it. This side area literally serves no purpose. There's definitely good aspects of the map design, but unfortunately it's not as fine-tuned as the bus depot is. Farm isn't really talked about too much whenever the topic of transit comes up, and that's honestly doing the area a disservice. Being able to build a turret trap from earlier maps is super cool and rarely used due to the lack of multiple buildables on solo and lack of desire to play transit for friend groups. Unlike the electric trap, the turret is actually useful, effective at defending a choke point or thinning out hordes if the player was to train nearby. There's a clear spot for one of the bus parts, and despite being fairly tight, the house where the buildable table is can be moved through mid-round, albeit dangerously. The outside area of the house in front of the garage with the semi-cab is also a functional training spot if needed. The outside area where the bus stops is even more open. However, the layout positives fall short. What should be a good introduction to the perk Double Tap, as well as potential ideas for farming-themed zombie fighting, is little more than a death trap for a considerable portion. The barn itself is randomly filled with boxes for no known reason, other than to cramp the area, and wherever a box is placed is essentially a one-way pass, including the stairs. A single wall-buy-in farm, the Remington, tucked away in a corner where no one would ever go because the entire barn area is a dead zone. In addition, the map has an entire pasture area that, despite being a perfect training space and fully playable, is walled off with an out-of-place window, making what should be an open area to escape the dead zone of the barn not but an alleyway in an open field. Presumably, this decision was made due to time constraints, throwing a standard wall window asset over an incomplete door for the players, but it's still a mar on the map's overall design, and a fairly simple one to fix, even if development times were tight. All the developer would need to do is remove the window barrier and put it at the zombie spawn in the small coop. Interestingly enough, in terms of design and map progression, the bus passes by a clear overturned power pylon on its side before reaching the area. This serves as a hint of two things. Firstly, that the map's power is approaching, presumably either at the next stop or just after, and secondly, more subtly, that power pylons are important in the next area and serve a purpose around the farm location. As before, each new area introduces a little bit more of the full map before looping back to allow the player to then explore each area as they desire. In addition to map clues, the farm also introduces the idea of the fridge to the players, where they would then learn that you can store items inside this fridge to be taken out later in emergencies, as well as introducing Double Tap, a perk that serves as a damage upgrade to the player. It's incredibly sad that the initial idea for this area was a lot larger than it ended up being, as the entire area feels too cramped to really shine as its own area. There's little keeping the player here or enticing their stay. There's a viable weapon, the AK-74U, but training outside the outhouse is dangerous, which means anytime the player wishes to refill their ammo, they have to loop the entire area. The power generators themselves, where Tombstone is, are entirely unsafe of an area, which hinders the already abysmal size of the area to play in. The place is nice for the ever so short jumping puzzle it gives to getting a jet gun piece and an electric trap piece, but if any zombies are in there, then the player is getting cut off immediately and there's nowhere to go. The player is entirely cut off from training, camping, or anything within these side areas, even if they are interesting. The actual process to turning on the power is fantastic from a design and entertainment perspective. Before Alpha Omega, the Avogadro was such a mystery. What is it? Why is it inside a power station? What was this lab in the power station, and why did town have more of it? The whole area electrifies, except in the power switch room, allowing players to watch the spectacle as this thing is released. By having the power station and the Avogadro both coupled into one event, the player is introduced to the next part of the map's progression. Afterwards, the player gains permanent power to all areas, allowing for buying of perks, using lamps without the turbine, and other map changes that allow for this next section of the map to add onto the established progression. In addition, the power turning on introduces the Avogadro to the map, a new challenge in the form of a spawning mini-boss. In terms of progression, Town offers the most over the others. It has the two most important perks of the map, Juggernog and Stamina Up. The jet gun buildable table is also here, serving as the central hub for the extensive trekking to build or rebuild the weapon. The Semtex wall buy and a potential bus part are both inside a bookstore, as those things typically are, and the players can, through slightly convoluted means, be introduced to the bank system, and, more importantly, the Pack-a-Punch area. All of these introductions are important additions to what the player already knows, and from a design perspective, it works perfectly as a build-up of the player's resources. After finding new weapons at the diner and getting the power turned on, at the final stop, the player progresses by essentially getting an ability upgrade through Juggernog and Stamina Up, moving faster and having more health. And they can also increase their strength and damage through the Pack-a-Punch. The map introduces the bus system and the buildables, then gives the player the mystery box for new weapons, then introduces the fridge, the Easter egg, and a potential damage increase, before introducing difficulty in the Avogadro, mini-boss at power, then upgrading the player to deal with the newfound threats. On the subject of overall map design, the buildings are open enough that several people can train and camp in both the bar and the burnt-out building by the bookstore. There is very little in terms of dead zones besides the stairway at Jugs, and the Pack-a-Punch room at higher rounds. Speaking of, while yes, it's possible to open Pack-a-Punch reliably, the fact it doesn't just stay open and requires another turbine is entirely asinine, but remnant of Kino der Toten's PAP style. In it, and several similar maps, the Pack-a-Punch has to be linked to a teleporter and jumped through. Then the players move to a new area until they are forced to leave, at which point they must restart the process. The idea is the same here, with fetching the turbine serving as the linking pad and placing it at the power station as connecting the uplink, which allows the players to teleport downstairs to the PAP area. The issue is that because of the map size, this linking of a teleporter style, one of two potential styles for opening PAP, the other being Quest unlocking PAP, which is talked about in other maps, takes significantly longer than most players care to deal with consistently. Yes, I'm using linking of a teleporter in a very loose sense, but in a mechanical sense it functions the same. Other than the Pack-a-Punch being a chore to open, it also has too little in it. From a map layout's perspective, it's simply 2 lab rooms. Why there's a lab under the bank? I don't know. But it lacks any real substance. It's literally 2 halls, and not very wide ones either. With ample spawns, it's far too easy to get trapped, and no way to train or camp effectively, rendering it a dead zone. Another issue with the town map design would be the cut content. By all means, PhD should have been in the map, and it should have been purchasable either inside the laundromat or the bowling alley, both of which should have been playable areas. Much like Farm, there's a fully rendered playable area that's just locked off, presumably due to time constraints, which would have made the area more substantial, but doesn't take too much away from the actual design in its absence. This area serves as the main hub for exclusively the Easter egg and Super Easter egg for the map. However, that's where the usefulness ends entirely. The cornfield maze is breathtakingly basic, and while I enjoy the denizens inside this area, as it helps incite a blinding panic of things coming out of the corn stalks like a horror movie, the actual playable area where the denizens aren't jumping at you constantly and the zombies aren't sprinting out from the corn is underneath the pylon itself. This area is roughly 20 feet across, a small square where the nav card table is built and the Easter egg steps are performed. Beyond that, however, there's little from a map design perspective for it. The most positive thing I could say about this area is it compartmentalizes most of the Easter egg to a side location, which makes it more of an Easter egg than a quest, which some players prefer, but ultimately does make up for the fact that this section of the cornfield is little more than a short maze that is a dead zone before an unsafe camping spot beneath the pylon, where zombies can flood from either direction. On the other hand, the far side of the cornfield has a short curve with a hidden area inside it between a somewhat hard to see pass in the corn. This pass leads to a ruined knocked-down totem bunker. Why the bunker is here? Couldn't tell you. But it is one of the classic maps, and therefore, even if it's just the main room on the first floor, it's open enough that within the building and the outside area inside the gate, the player can effectively train or camp. While the layout itself is decent, the map does struggle, as in many places, to have a reason to be there. Most of the side areas have a couple things to reward players who explore, but there's nothing here beyond one of the jet gun pieces and an avcard table piece. The tunnel has the M16, the Hunter's Shack has the Bowie knife, but the cornfield bunker lacks anything to draw the players to it. It's not terribly designed, but it's out of the way, and there's no reason to be there after the jet gun or nav card table is assembled. The hunter's cabin is unfortunately a waste. It's a shame too, as the map does a fantastic job of setting up a clue that it's there, and having the proper atmosphere and mystery in the aesthetic of a derelict cabin hidden in the fog. For a player moving through the power station to town, there's a very clear side section of fire on the ground, which veteran players recognize as the fire in front of the cabin's entrance. It's distinctly loaded in on the pathway despite the heavy fog. However, this hint does not redeem the area in any way. Even if you follow the pathway to the cabin, the issue is that this side area is fairly large, with an entire backyard filled with snaking trees and side area loops. The front yard has an embedded axe, and there's the cabin itself, a one-room shack with a fireplace and ruined bed. However, beyond the interior and the axe, you'd never know about any of the rest of it because of the denizens in the fog. As usual, a lot of the map's finer detail is hidden behind the loading screen of Tranzit, but it's especially problematic here as it renders the entire area a dead zone. The cabin is too small to train in, too open to camp in, but you could never run a train in the space outside because despite not having dense fog in the area just outside the cabin, much like the knocked bunker, denizens still attack without any leeway. The second you step off that porch, they spawn in to jump at you, which effectively kills any further exploration into the area, despite the massive space behind the cabin to run through. Furthermore, from a design perspective, having a clear melee weapon out in the open, especially on a team the farmer outdoors type, yet having no way to gain the axe shows quite the lack of foresight under this area. The Bowie knife is there, yes, but by the design and half-baked nature of the area's detail and the denizen spawns, it feels like the hunter's cabin was created to house the Bowie knife, and not the Bowie knife was put in there because there was a hunter's cabin. The tunnel before the diner is obvious and clear the whole way inside it. Aesthetically it works because the missile fallout wouldn't be inside an underground tunnel. From a map design standpoint, it helps the progression because the player will naturally be curious to it, and it shows the player that there are other areas of safety outside the bus stops. There's also the largest jet gun part here, the main turbine, and potentially the largest nav card part, the board. Most likely, the players will see it and naturally will want to backtrack to it, and if they miss it, they also have Walgun there as well, which further emphasizes the idea that not only are there other areas between the bus stops, but there are useful items there as well. While yes, the parts are for the jet gun, which is now useless, and the nav card table, which no one understands, from a design standpoint, it's a very strong choice that helps plant clues the player will pick up on and act upon. The tunnel is also mostly a 4-lane highway with rubble and destroyed cars, but mostly open, and therefore easy to train in. Who doesn't love a good old 5-minute trek through blinding fog with weird demon baby Smeagol looking things jumping at you every 5 seconds to slow the trek down even more? Who doesn't love sprinting aimlessly, unable to see while having to constantly knife? Oh, right, silly me. Everyone! Not to mention the giant pools of lava you have to jump through in order to move to the nearest area. If you don't have jugs when you try this, then you're most likely dead. Not only because the player will take roughly red screen damage from it, but because denizens also spawn as well. and will both burn and jump on the player, and the player cannot run while their eyes are being clawed out by Andy's circus. The tragedy is that the map really is interesting once the fog is off, and would truly have benefited substantially more than Origins with a remaster. You can see that there was a decent amount of care put into these pathways, but you'd never tell due to the fog, and any remaster of this map would need some fog to cover the edges of the map to not break the illusion and hide the ending textures, but not limit the visibility to this drastic of a degree. Perhaps the only positive of the road is there's a bridge that collapses, which at least is an interesting moment in the game cycle, and Ted has a funny voice line for it. It's also worth mentioning that the lamppost placements are always right next to an area, including the side areas. If you land seemingly in the middle of nowhere, chances are you're right next to the hunter's cabin or the shortcut to town. As with the map design, the aesthetic is heavily divided between each stop on the bus route, with little similarity beyond "it's dark out here because there's ash and lava's on the ground." However, I will refrain from extensive analysis of each area as I did with the map section and focus on the positive and negative aspects for each section and therefore adding on to what was discussed already. The design of the bus depot is basic but quite nice. There's a lot of good detail to it despite its size, even in the out of bounds areas like across the street. Having the zombie spawns come from places like a bathroom or the office by the buildable table is organic and atmospheric rather than simply having them crawl out of indistinguishable part of road. The look of an old last century township is really nailed in this area with the blue neon and checkered tiles amidst the building style. Having one of the outdoor spawns be from a nuclear shelter at the bus station is perfectly ironic, and also adds to the setting without needing anything more than a simple sign to tell the players so much about the area they're in and what time it's from. Surprisingly, the tunnel's detailing is quite high for the side windows zombies come out of. Seeing things like maintenance side tunnels, there's a fence blocking off one of the areas, and other interesting assets really sell the area. And despite the fog and denizens, the safe area is set up as a barricaded holding point by another fallout shelter, which works very well as an atmospheric story, showing that after the rockets hit, a lot of people must have tried to hold out within this tunnel. The tunnel itself, however, isn't super well detailed, but with the slight fog inside the tunnel, it helps mitigate the issues of the textures not being the greatest. One of the most recognizable parts of Transit, the diner's detail is unfortunately not as good as the bus depot. There's a very small garage and a diner with some neon signs. The signs are great. Sure, it's cheesy to have it say "dog" instead of diner, but I believe that cheesiness is vital to zombies. The diner itself, however, is pretty bland, but that's due to its size. Behind the counter is a bunch of bug and mold infesting dishware and appliances, which is the right kind of gross for a post apocalypse. And while the rest of the diner is just a line of tables, it's at the very least accurate, and notably, the menu above the counter has real items on it, something I never knew until I took the time to look around in here closely. The garage itself is a bit strange, with having a restroom that has a door outside and inside, and the garage itself is only fit for a single car, despite being a gas station and repair center, as evident by the collapsed pump and overhead. The detail inside these places is somewhat lackluster, but it does bear noting that while the buildings are small, they are stylized correctly for what building they're supposed to be. The main building of farm is decorated rather nicely, with the wallpaper, the decoration, and furniture you would expect for a small farming house from the 1950s or 60s. While the house is mostly gutted for play, what remains is well designed for an accurate representation. However, the barn itself is little more than a well-designed exterior with nothing inside. The decision to simply chuck a bunch of boxes inside and call it a barn is absolutely horrendous aesthetically and a wasted opportunity. Where there should have been animal stalls, farm equipment, or tractors, instead there's just the same box asset sprayed around like a box grenade went off. However, where this area really shines is the unplayable areas, ironically. There's a wealth of interesting things to look at, from coops to a couple vehicles, a silo, a small vegetable garden, the cornfields behind the house. Even if the game never told you anything about the area and hid all the playable space from view, just looking at it from the surrounding scenery, you would immediately know that a farm is supposed to be here. While hard to see, the cornfield does have its strengths in terms of visual design. For one, a giant cornfield with hidden pathways is always intriguing and mysterious, which helps the tone for the area as well as increase the map's speculative theorizing. The actual maze inside the cornfield by the pylon is designed to be a crop circle, something I'd never known until shown an overhead view of the area. A fantastic decision, as given that crop circles are supposed to be weird, mysterious, and even alien, it perfectly complements the Easter egg taking place within it, and that the center of the crop circle, the pylon, is the crux of said Easter egg, and this polarization device that both Maxis and Richtofen yearn to be powered in their favor. The knocked side of the corn isn't poor visually either. The bunker itself is just a copy-paste with some changes to prevent players from accessing more than the initial area, but behind the bunker is even a ruined overpass, almost hidden just out of view. This overpass is brilliant in allowing the player to mentally connect the different areas, showing that there's more to the map in theory and that there's more beyond the playable area, increasing the immersion so players feel like they're in a world instead of a map. There's even turbines, like wind turbines, up on a hill that you can only really see if you take the time to stop and look over there. Visually, the power station is polarizing. Jokes about electricity aside, while small, the power station has a lot to be discussed. On the bright side, pun not intended, the transformer section with the collapsed walkway and the apparent pit directly to the devil is visually sound, with good construction of assets to create a collapsed industrial section that the players will immediately be careful of when they see it, as there's a giant fire pit and a sparking electrical transformer sending bolts of lightning up its wires. Additionally, there's part of a semi-truck that's careened into the building, giving great visual storytelling for some of the damage done to the station as well as interesting scenery to look at. The outhouse, while unsure why it leads to the pack-a-punch door power and a hidden laboratory beneath the power station, is a silly, cheesy way to introduce the sci-fi portion of the area. An entire electrical station and lab hidden underneath an outhouse that makes a flushing noise when you fall down it. Absolutely hilarious and fantastic aesthetic design. However, the lab itself is not exactly well made. There are two colors inside this section: black and, more notably, white. I truly hope you have on sunglasses when you first enter this area, as the blinding glowing whites of everything in here has probably caused retina damage to several teenagers who played this map in its heyday. Stark white laboratory design is nothing new, but to have the all-white glow in the player's face versus the overwhelmingly washed out and dark map in all other sections simply hurts to look at. There's little to talk about outside of the cabin, as it's mostly just trees and open space in the fog, but the cabin itself has several interesting visual choices that help it wear the map design to not. First off, the axe in the log serves as an immediate visual cue that this is some outdoorsman's cabin. On the inside, there's a very obvious wall by the Bowie knife, as it both glows and the cabin is scorched wood, which helps establish that this is a hunter's cabin. Inside the actual cabin and around are scores of skulls inside the fire of the fireplace and the mantle, on the floor, everywhere. Both human and strangely primate skulls are found here, which is fascinating because it could allude to the idea that the denizens were experimented upon monkeys inside the lab underneath the town bank, where the pack-a-punch is found, and this hunter, being nearby, killed as many as he could with either zombies or people before being killed or driven out. It makes you think upon looking closer at it, which is one of the most important parts of any good visually designed map. This portion of the map consists of a four-way intersection that has been reduced to a burning mess. Visually, there's nothing outstanding about it. There's good detailing with the bar and the bookstore without sacrificing too much mobility, and the bank is basic but functional. There's a decent amount of detail put into the zombie spawns, having highly detailed rooms just out of sight or barely within it, that helps create the organic feeling of the area. Unfortunately, two of the more detailed areas, the laundromat and the bowling alley, are unplayable, presumably due to development time constraints, as mentioned earlier. Visually, each building is distinct, yet similar enough they don't feel out of place. By the shortcut is an eerily lit church, and more buildings in the fog, both of which emphasize the apocalyptic nature of the map and helping the scenery feel like a township is here, not just the intersection. There's nothing groundbreaking about this area visually, even in the Pack-a-Punch area. Despite it being too small, there's enough detail in the windows to sell the idea of an experimental lab down here. The players just can't get to it. While the wall of cages is a bit lazy, given the theory the denizens were monkeys from this lab that mutated from the experiments mentioned earlier, it's worth looking past, but noting that the cages could have been scattered in other areas inside the barriers. An overall interesting part of this map is color scheme. The overall sky or air is colored in accordance to what area you're in, which is an interesting distinguishing facet of each area to identify your surroundings. The bus depot's area is dark blue, like a navy shade. The diner's shading is an orangish red, darker than the power station, and more of a burning red with some orange than the straight orange. The farm is a dark green, like a pine color, and the power station is an almost bright orange, leaning more heavily into the color of fire than the diner. Finally, the town is reddish-brown, almost like the air is clay. While it's nice to have color-coded map sections for setting the atmosphere, it's also brilliant from a design standpoint because having separate colors for each area, including the side areas in between, allows for a player when teleporting to immediately identify where they are. The lampposts are typically placed 2 per area, and there are at least 2 that have no identifying landmarks nearby. Being able to look at the area around, see the color, and know immediately where the player is located is a fantastic way to counteract the oppressive nature of the fog. One rarely talked about portion of a zombies map is the zombies models themselves, sometimes for good reason, as for several maps the zombies models were Nazi soldier and left at that, which is perfectly fine. But as time went on, the models are altered to fit with the map they're found in, representing dead inside the area for immersion. Transit is no different, but most notably, the zombies wear clothing from an insane asylum, including and most notably straitjackets. This aesthetically adds to the intrigue and horror of the map, as asylums are prime horror locations, and not directly interacting with said asylum or hospital adds to the mystery of the map, causing the players to ask where these zombies came from and if they're connected to the labs found beneath the town and the power station. The biggest tragedy of this map's aesthetic is its own limitations. It's such a shame that care and detail went into creating a small town ravaged by the 115 rockets to no recognition. There's so many interesting set pieces to this map, so many things to look at, but you'd never see them. The fog obscures the entire landscape between the designated junctions, but there's a wealth of scenery behind that fog, only limited by the older gen hardware and Treyarch's own lack of willingness to remaster a storyline not enough people enjoyed. The fog is thematic, but breaks too much of the map into a basic sprint blindly while denizens spaz at you. The roadways are fascinating, but all their charm and character is locked behind the fog. Did you know there's a train that goes between the power station and town? Did you know the power station has fuel tanks across the road? Did you know there's wind turbines by the cornfields, or that the church in town has unique blue lighting? Did you know there's a road coming to the bus station from presumably Nuketown or a different area? Did you know there's a barricade blocking the highway which connects to town and goes on a bridge behind the knock bunker, and the bus moves to the stops it does because of a navigational error because of this blockage? I didn't. Not until I saw the derailed cars and tracks when I was looking at the map without any fog through modding. Not until I saw the extended section of highway moving up into the edge of the map, even though the fog usually cuts vision after about 5 to 10 feet. Not until someone pointed it out in a video no-clipping past the barriers and removing fog to show what the map offers but can't be seen. There's extended roadways that continue far into the distance, detailed, which would add so much to the map's atmosphere of being a collection of locations along a township, that there's an actual world around and the players are just fighting here for now. It's really a shame because if you follow the tracking of the highway to the bus stop, it presumably follows the overpass seen in the prototype or the Noct bunker, almost out of view as mentioned, which loops back to connecting the map in a unique way, explaining visually that the map is a small side town beside a bypass, and the navigational error is why the bus ends up here instead of along the highway it was on. Even town, as central as it is, has hidden roadways that further connect the map into more of a standard grid than normal, just hard to see because of the fog. The reason, despite all this, that I rank the aesthetic as a 2 over a 1 is the atmosphere is truly perfect for what it was trying to be. This map is the first look at a destroyed world following the events of the map Moon. There's storms, ash blanketing everywhere. It's dark and unnerving, and you're running through a nowhere town usually bypassed with the highway that's now cut off. The map's visual design is astounding for conveying the bleak, hopeless situation the players now find themselves facing, even with the fog. While yes, the fog is oppressive, I find that without the fog, the map loses some of that aesthetic, some of that creepiness and danger. While yes, it should be less fog, it's still an important part of the look of the map. Speaking of fog, all the areas I mentioned that the player wouldn't normally notice in the visual design of the map are in fact all visible, a revelation that came to me when recording. That train wreck, you'll run past it in the fog. You can see the power tanks and the pylons running from the hunter's cabin to power in the fog and at power, and even follow the pylons the whole way through the fog to farm or town. The bus station road, coincidentally the highway the tunnel is connected to, you see it in spawn when the game starts. The highway by the diner, you'd think it'd be invisible, but the whole road can be seen from atop the diner roof. The reason you never see any of it is because mostly during gameplay, with denizens in the hectic sprinting around, the player doesn't typically stop and smell the burning roses. But it is all there, which is why it's ranked so highly. The Easter egg, Tower of Babel, is among the easiest Easter eggs to ever be conceived. All of the steps are consolidated to a single, tiny section of the map, an energy pylon in the middle of a cornfield. While short, the Easter egg does have some good things going for it. For starters, it's definitely impressive once completed, as the lampposts around the map shoot orange or blue lights to the energy pylon, which also resonates the same color. On top of this, the Maxis side has regular power drops spawn under the pylon, albeit rarely, serving as the single reason to return to this pylon or the entire cornfield, single-handedly keeping this part of the map alive. The Easter egg itself is quite easy to follow, partially because of how quick it is. The quotes give a mostly clear direction of what to do next, even if it's hard to hear them because Treyarch can't balance their audio better. The story of polarization devices isn't the best, but given that there's radios of other survivors that have been contacted and the Victus crew is the only one who've gotten this far, is quite interesting, and something only touched upon in this map. In addition, the supposed polarization device is inside of a cornfield in a crop circle, which is certainly thematic for a mystic device that is powered with supernatural electricity or energy. Interestingly enough, once the power's on, the pylon needed for the Easter egg is the only one to light up, and it's very hard to miss when you pass through the cornfield, as there are blinking red lights and electrical sparks. The red lights are also blinking in Morse code, the same as the stoplight in town. Any curious player will naturally want to investigate, especially from an Easter egg hunter's perspective. There's no denying that Tranzit was innovative. The idea of buildables has remained a staple of the games ever since, and the zombie shield has become nigh vital to survival in later zombie games. Being able to store a gun for later use, or store points that are kept track over 3 separate maps, still blows my mind. While yes, it did trivialize the difficulty of the maps, you can see remnants of the idea fine-tuned over the course of the next Treyarch games, with gobblegums and elixirs serving the same fundamental purpose in many cases as the bank system, and being able to customize gun attachments or loadouts in-game functioning the same way the fridge would, allowing the player to choose what weapons they wanted. Even permaperks, something unique to the Victus maps, found lasting impressions in Return in Black Ops 3's Gobblegums outside the ones that served as the bank's purpose of gaining points or setting up faster. Most unique permaperks gained a Gobblegum slot in later games, such as the fake PhD and Perma Tombstone. The fridge was reworked into Gobblegums such as Wall Power, Crate Power, and Ephemeral Enhancement, allowing for more flexibility in usage but requiring a Mega Gobblegum. Another positive is the detail of the equipment. While the player builds everything but the box and perks on this map, which most people might agree is a tad bit excessive, every buildable has great care taken to give it character and intricacies in design that shows a great deal of effort in creating an immersive and unique set of equipment. For all its hate, the jet gun visually looks impressive, with a large amount of moving parts to it, and has utility in pulling in power-ups or apparently being able to hover the player if fired in midair. Both the zombie shield and the turret all make sense for a cobbled-together piece of equipment, each of their parts and design working together organically. The shield uses a dolly in the diner and a car door from the wrecked one inside the gas station garage. The turret uses a broken RPD and a lawnmower for support, the latter of which perfectly suiting a farm area, and each buildable has its own unique traits. Did you know the jet gun smokes when it's redlining? Did you know the turbine fin on the back changes in accordance to the remaining health it has, upright, sideways, or pointed down? Did you know every time the player picks up the zombie shield from the workbench, they lock the car door? Did you know the battery part for the electric trap is the same for the pack-a-punch, and therefore interchangeable between the two? Another interesting thing about Tranzit's buildable system, and by extension Buried's, but that's another conversation, is that it's a prototype of the specialist weapon system. All the buildables, save for the power switch, the bus, and the pack-a-punch, all break after a certain amount of usage, exactly how specialist weapons work, especially the jet gun, as it recharges over time instead of needing to pick up a new buildable. While specialists recharge per kill, the idea of a recharge is still there. It's interesting to see Transit have so many new ideas that over time would be fine-tuned for later maps. Both Transit and Buried have multiple buildables per map, allowing for the player to choose what equipment they want, a feature not found again until Black Ops 4, as specialist equipment was a one type per map thing in Black Ops 3, and not in Infinite Warfare nor Advanced Warfare Zombies. Finally, issues with the map's layout and size can be diminished by holding the turbine out, increasing player speed and knife recovery, which keeps the denizens dead before they get to the player even with the basic knife. And the outhouse can be used to ensure the turbine's survivability when powering Pack-a-Punch's entrance. Unfortunately, despite being fantastic design-wise, functionality-wise, there's a lot to be desired. The first and most obvious problem with the equipment is power. 3 out of the 7 buildables require power, and 2 of the buildables are power devices, meaning truly it's 60% of the buildables on this map require a power source, and only Pack-a-Punch works with the main map's power source out of those buildables. Yes, the player can plant all the buildables, something removed for the shield in later maps, and this allows for some mitigation of management, but the tediousness of hot swapping all the buildables while also trying to constantly power them with a turbine and re-grabbing them when they break is beyond the amount of fun the player gains from building and setting the equipment up in a specific location, say the bus, meaning it overall is a chore, not a positive, despite the design fundamentally making sense. There are unfortunately negatives for all the buildables as well, and thus I will talk about each individually. The turbine is the fundamental standard for the map, needed for most of the game's accessibility, and to power both the Pack-a-Punch door and 2 of the player's optional equipment. Yet, there's a critical design flaw in its apparent ability to act as a monkey bomb, but only if the player isn't nearby. Why zombies seek out the turbine could be explained by noise or bright lights, but all it does is limit the already short amount of time a player will have, say, in keeping the Pack-a-Punch door open. In addition, there's a considerable gap between health state changes, where the turbine stops powering to stumble for a few seconds. but it's at least 5 seconds of powering off before chugging along again, which is a huge gap in higher rounds when a constant power flow is needed, and it should have been 2 or 3 seconds at most. In addition, by the way the turbine works, it takes health damage to power an item, but if it's damaged already, the flickering on and off power and repower the item, which deals damage much faster and thus quickly kills the turbine, which is exacerbating the already annoying issue. Being able to plant a shield might be nice for some nuance of being able to stall zombies when camping, but the biggest issue is that there's no good place to put it. Because the player has to be able to mantle over it, the shield cannot be placed in any doorways. It doesn't last enough time during consecutive hits either, so it's always a better option to just have it on your back. The worst part is that despite the buildables seeming to work best as a sort of secondary upgrade system to the bus, the zombie shield cannot be placed inside of the bus anywhere, meaning that the player cannot bring it onto the bus with all the other traps available. The turret is severely underrated. It will kill zombies, quite effectively too. One of the most popular strategies I've seen with it is placing it inside of the bus, pointing out the back, where the zombies follow during travel. However, the biggest downside is its location. It requires power and is built in the farm, which is the most out-of-the-way location in the map, save for the knocked bunker. Needing to return to this area or move from this area back to the bus depot constantly hinders the playability of the map, taking most of your time to run back and forth instead of playing. As with the electrical trap, getting kills with it is also finicky. It works best firing at a distance, but struggles to fire correctly if the zombies are near or on the bus. Let's be honest with ourselves here. The electrical trap brings this whole list down. I could hype up the entirety of the buildables all day long, but there's always going to be a glaring hole in the wall bringing the whole room down. That hole is the electric trap. On the surface, it's not the worst idea. In theory, you place down the trap, zombies walk over it, and get electrocuted like a mobile, smaller version of the standard Black Ops 1 trap. However, the issue with the trap is that it just doesn't work. I've tried on several occasions to get consistent kills with it, but the zombies just go around it. The buildable itself is only big enough for one zombie at a time, so while in theory if they march single file down a narrow hallway they'd all die, in reality a couple actually die from the trap while the rest either go through or crowd around it. Not to mention, despite having an active battery on it, the trap requires power, meaning you have to dedicate a run from the power station to the bus depot just to use it anyway. While I personally love the idea of the jet gun, and I think people hate on it because it's the norm, there's no denying the glaring issues of it. The timer to cool down the gun should have been halved. The duration it could fire doubled or tripled. It should have cooled down regardless of whether or not it was out. I think some of the reason for this performance can be attributed to the fear of giving one player too much power, as any infinite damage wonder weapon was abhorrent in the eyes of Treyarch during Black Ops 2 for some reason. Only the Mob Tomahawk, the Charged Ice and Wind Stabs, and the Jet Gun are truly infinite damage, with the Sliquifire being a one-shot up until round 101. They even nerfed the Paralyzer to not kill past round 70 because of this balancing concern. However, I personally believe that the biggest reason the Jet Gun performs so poorly is because it's designed to break. Its sole purpose in the Easter egg is to shoot away from the nav card table to power the pylon with heat, and it must be broken to complete the step. In creating a weapon that the players must break, the gun in theory was then made easy to break for the players, the problem being that then the players had to lug each individual part across the map from the pylon back to town in order to rebuild it, and would have to do that each time it broke. Yes, the player can melee cancel to increase the gun's efficiency. Yes, there's ample time and training to let it cool down. Yes, you can item swap to bring multiple parts at a time since shared inventory wasn't created yet and wasn't backwards patched in. But much like the issue with opening Pack-a-Punch, having exploits to counteract some of the issues at hand does not excuse the map from having the issues in the first place. The bus was a wonderful idea, a moving vehicle for the players to ride on and defend as zombies chased after it. While not the first moving vehicle in a zombies game, that title belonging to the minecart ride in Shangri-La, it was the first independently moving vehicle, traveling around a set route while the players rode or stayed behind. While the bus never seems to stay where you need it to, there are timers for the bus, each stop having its own timer for how long the bus stays with or without the player there. On top of that, you can hurry up the bus by getting on it or by knifing Ted, the driver. Ted will throw you out if you knife him too much, however, so knifer beware and all that. What's interesting about the bus is its tiers of gameplay. Initially, the bus is just that, a mode of transportation. Over the course of the game, however, players can constantly add to it until it's a fortress, at least on paper. The bus upgrades are helpful, a plow to ensure no zombies jump through the front window, and a ladder to help you climb over the roof for when the bus is stopped at a location that otherwise you'd be stuck on the outside. But there's more than just bus parts. Both the electric trap and the turret can be placed inside the bus or on top of the bus, and both are powered by the turbine, which can also be placed inside or on top of the bus. While it would make more sense to be able to power these traps with the bus, since it clearly still has gas and electricity generating, having the ability to beef up the bus with buildables from around the different bus stops is a novel concept. In addition, by staying on the bus each time the players move to a new location, they can rearm the bus with the buildables, should they have broken in the time between the stops. Zombies also move very slowly on the bus, stumbling at a shamble speed, which keeps the bus from being a dead zone, as it is viable camping, and if necessary, the players can always bail out the doors. However, at later rounds this becomes significantly harder as the number of zombies versus player capability of destroying said zombies becomes an exponentially increasing variable, and while there is technically a wall weapon within the bus, it's the B23R, which is essentially useless, as is the electric trap, which even in such a tight corridor fails to effectively stop the zombies from just breaking it or the turbine. Furthermore, zombies can break open the hatch to go onto the roof and hurt most defensive capabilities on the bus, yet you can't climb out the hole they make unless you put the hatch there, instead of just the hatch staying closed because you took the galvanuckles instead. There's also the issue of getting on the bus while moving. It's a mess trying to stay on the ladder or even climb through the door if the bus is doing anything but standing still, counteracting the entire purpose of the bus. Finally, drops do not stay in the bus, but rather sit in the air where they're dropped, a small issue that is easily fixed, but an issue within the map nonetheless, making it hard to reliably get power-ups on the bus unless camping in the back. While necessary for the Easter egg, the EMP grenades will see little usage outside of it in the map, but I feel like too many people don't understand how useful these EMP grenades are. Does it work stunning zombies? Yes. Does it one-shot the mini-boss, the Avogadro? Yes. Does it reliably save the player better than monkeys? Maybe. The activation time for monkeys is longer, by roughly double than for the EMP to detonate, but zombies will only stay in their stun state if they're not touching the player, which, if the player is cornered, means they won't be helped. However, if the player does not touch the zombies, i.e. get next to them, the time that they're stunned for is actually insane. At well over a minute of zombies ignoring the player, shambling around aimlessly. They only return to approaching the player if the player shoots at them, knifes them, or gets too close to them. Design-wise, I believe the idea behind the trolling of this grenade was an attempt at realism, but it would have made more sense that the EMP grenades would have returned to any of the Grief game modes, working as sabotage equipment for other teams, but never did. A wonderful addition to zombies, these were another innovation to branching out zombie gameplay. A one-hit kill until round 14, the popularity of high-damage melee weapons began with this introduction. Following this was the Golden Spork, the One-Inch Punch, and eventually the Ethereal Razor perk in Black Ops 4, all allowing for melee-focused gameplay for the zombies players who enjoy knife-only gameplay without slamming your head into a wall. Beyond high damage, the Knuckles serve to provide a host of utilities to the map as well. They, as the strongest melee option, kill denizens in 2 hits, significantly easing the tediousness of running through the fog. They also deal extensive damage to the Avogadro, allowing for an alternative to killing him besides EMP grenades, which are a box pull. The new introductory perk to this map is Double Tap 2.0. a revitalizing of a classic perk that massively increases its usefulness by not only doubling rate of fire but damage as well. There's no other perks introduced on this map, as evident by the lack of a perk machine where someone might have put one in this solo game I have recorded. Truth be told, the power station's equipment is rough. Both the electric trap and Tombstone Soda are found here, and both are abysmal to use. The perk itself is sound in theory. When you down, you can choose to die if players can't get to you, one of the challenges of the map, and when you respawn, you can pick up your tombstone to get your guns and perks back. However, the problem with the perk is twofold. First, the player is timed. I can understand having a time limit on regaining the player's equipment, but the player is also spawning in at a round change, which severely limits the player's ability to recover the tombstone, especially given the map size. The player has 90 seconds to get to the tombstone, but with it taking around 6 minutes without stamina or using the turbine glitch to loop the map, this translates to roughly 1 minute 12 seconds on average time to run between the 5 main areas. Meaning unless you are either in the same area or the next over, you cannot regain your tombstone. The timer should be at least 3 minutes, maybe 5, to allow for running back to the tombstone no matter where it is. Secondly, this perk is severely outclassed by a perma-perk which works on a much better system of keeping perks on revive instead of incentivizing abandoning teammates to try and keep your perks. Granted, this is a perma-perk that came with Buried, not with Transit, but its existence negates any need for the perk itself. The perk, as mentioned, incentivizes the player to kill themselves and stranding teammates, as reviving a player with Tombstone doesn't let them keep their perks, only if they kill themselves and regain the Tombstone, which is counterproductive to a cooperative zombie experience. An interesting fact I don't really see anyone talk about is because of the way Perma-Tombstone works, there is a helpful glitch for the Maxis side of the Tower of Babel. You can buy your perks, and then if you go down, letting someone revive you with Perma-Tombstone will have the perks default to on, even though the power is off, allowing for ease in trying to lure the Avogadro if the step is causing problems. Is Transit fun to play? Does it entertain? It's a small question, but one that's entirely subjective to a degree. Masochism exists. Dark Souls exists. Portions of population tend to love challenging gameplay, games that push the player beyond casual play. To this end, Transit is fun. There's a lot to enjoy in the map, even if there's glaring issues to it, as discussed above. The map's wow factor has a lot going for it as well. When doing the Easter egg, there's no permanent perkaholics because who honestly knows, but there is fanfare to it. Once the power's on, the entire pylon in the crop circle blinks red and sparks, letting the player know something about it is important, and any Easter egg hunter should automatically check it out. When the Easter egg is done, the whole pylon lights up orange or blue, with the lamppost sending electric rays to the pylon as well, offering a huge spectacle for the map's completion. And it's not just the Easter egg that has a wow factor either. While the map is dark and filled with ash and embers, there's always a storm brewing overhead once the Avogadro is released. Even if not directly overhead, the players can see it in the distance, adding a wonderful sense of foreboding. The Avogadro himself can be seen leaving the power station, a small detail not too many people pick up on. No, I don't mean the power releases him. I mean if you're outside the power room, say where Tombstone would be, you can see him fly up into the sky when released. The bridge collapses when first moved on. The sheer number of parts to build everything ensures there's something to do. There's near infinite places to set up a host of traps. While lacking in side Easter eggs, save for the Shrek outhouse by Spawn, the amount of things to do in-game will lead to an entertaining time in a technical sense, and the map is interesting to look at, with the denizens and the fog always distracting in the more open areas to keep the map harder. Speaking of, while certain changes would make the individual areas easier in some players' eyes, the difficulty of Transit is supposed to come not from cramped map design, but from the exact opposite. The map is huge, with long swaths of open area between and inside most of the bus stops. Training isn't the hard part. The hard part is the distance. No one place has everything the player needs. Every area has something missing. The bus depot does not have the space for groups. The diner outside of the box lacks a wall by that's safe to get ammo for mid-round, as well as only having speed cola. The farm has the fridge but lacks useful wall weapons. The power station doesn't have a good buildable or perk, and town doesn't have any wall weapons. If your group stays together at every mistake, every down, the group has to relocate several times to regain perks, weapons, etc. Everything necessary is spread out, so falling in one area means revisiting the others to reset up. If you're on your own, the difficulty is not necessarily in the spread out nature, as you're already able to move about by yourself, not needing to group everyone on the bus and waiting on its stops, but you run the risk of dying for any down. Sure, the overall map is fairly open and easy to train in on paper, but the difficulty of the map is not in fighting zombies, it's in the risk of losing so much progress that requires a lot of time and stress to reclaim back to full perks and weapons. However, the difficulty is also amplified by the supreme lack of reliable get-out-of-jail-free cards. Usually, if a player is trapped, a quick-thinking player will make use of a powerful wonder weapon, a zombie shield, etc., to escape instead of downing. This, however, relies on the available wonder weapons and traps on the map to be sufficiently powerful to accomplish this, which Tranzit lacks. The most powerful weapon on Tranzit is the jet gun, which lacks sustainability and reliability. There is a zombie shield, but the player cannot use the shield and any other equipment at the same time. So no turbine, no jet gun, just the shield, which doesn't exactly help if the player is cornered. I also cannot score this section any higher due to the map's tediousness. While I might not mind, there's no denying that too much of the map's gameplay loop revolves around moving through the map. Running to get a turbine, running to get your perks back, running to get the jet gun parks. And even then, while running, the player is constantly interrupted by the denizens, which lengthens the time even more between actual zombie fighting. The fog is frustrating, the denizens are perhaps the most aggravating mechanic in zombies, and the downtime between fighting can be monstrous, all hindering the replayability of the map. When you think of Tranzit, there's too many instances of, ugh, I hate running so much to get anywhere. The map is past the threshold of tedious to play versus entertainment, hindering the score despite many positives. Overall, this means Tranzit scores a 6 out of 10. Honestly, it was quite surprising. I have a rose-tinted lens for my first real zombies map, sure, but the more I delved into studying this map's structure, the more of an appreciation I had for what it did, even if the positives, like most of the map, are hidden away. The epitome of this map is the phrase, good on paper. So much of this map is sound in terms of design, yet the implementation, for many things, is a bit too lacking to hold this map any higher. It's not the worst possible map ever times 1,000 or whatever YouTubers say, but it's also not an exceedingly well-polished masterpiece either, not like Shadows of Evil or Origins. It's middle of the road, a taxing yet fun experience, and the more a player might learn about the map, the easier it becomes, until even the most extreme Victus haters might come to have some fun.